Hello, and welcome to Introducing Me. I'm your host, Sarah. I started this podcast to get to know other people and lifestyles while discovering more about myself. If you listened to my last episode, you'll know that today is the last episode of the podcast. Since today I'll be in the role of guest, I'd like to hand it over to my husband, Coleman.
Thanks, Sarah. It's been a couple years since you had me host on your podcast, and I'm happy to be here for your final episode. Why don't we start with you sharing more about why you've decided to end your podcast?
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned it in my last episode when I was introducing my guest, Julia, because she was the first guest that I had that I repeated her on a second episode because I decided to do that for my final episode. And I just kind of vaguely said that, I wanted 2025 to look different. Each year I've done these year in reviews as the podcast anniversary has come together, and you've sat and done some of them with me, but the last couple I think you haven't done with me, purely just for like a finding time to record and getting them to come out. It just kind of like worked out that way. So I felt like it made sense to have you here today. And so, when I did that episode in September, it was before we had gotten married, and I was like, everyone says like you get married and things change, but like we've been living together for a number of years, and we went and changed our names, and we've done all that legal mumbo jumbo, and there's still some to do, but otherwise it's kind of like things are similar, things, somewhat have changed and whatnot, but I started kind of thinking towards 2025. Sometimes they say when you typically in a heterosexual relationship, when the wife plans the wedding, then she has nothing to do after that. Like she doesn't have her next big thing. And we had a long engagement, so I was a little bit concerned about that. Like, what would it look like afterwards? And I'm sure in my episode in September, I know I talked about how like after the wedding didn't really exist, because it was kind of like everything was leading up to the wedding. We were going to a wedding 5 weeks later, and then we were going out of town to see a concert. And that was kind of like all we had planned besides for the upcoming holidays. Not really knowing what sort of things we want to do in 2025 as we kind of navigate various things. And so when I started somewhat thinking about that more and figuring out like, how do I want to, kind of like look at the year, what are the goals that I want to accomplish? What are things that maybe I haven't been doing that I want to be doing? And how do all of those things come together? I just kind of realized that timing wise, like I've always known from even before starting the podcast that running a podcast like by myself, not having it through any company or anything, would be a lot of work. And it has been. And I've acknowledged that, that's why in the past, year or so, I haven't released every week. Like that's a lot of podcasts do seasons, but I knew that longer breaks would lead me to not go back to the microphone. And I didn't want to do that where it's like the podcast just ended, because I know that happens to some podcasts too. And so instead I kind of, changed my release schedule, and it was working. And, it's not like the podcast was any more work in the last little bit than it was previously, but I realized that a lot of my time, like I have a full-time job, so I'm gone, 40, 45 hours a week for that. And if you have a busy weekend, then it's like, there's not much other time in the week. And we play in a community band, so that's a once a week commitment, like my Monday nights are gone. So that leaves me with Tuesday through Friday. And I would find myself once, twice, maybe 3 times a week in the evenings working towards the podcast. And those other nights, occasionally I'd be doing other things, but otherwise there was a lot of like doom scrolling on the internet, or just feeling like I wasn't getting things done because I just like wanted to relax. And which led to the doom scrolling on the internet, because while I have things that I like to do to relax that I feel like good about or might like feel productive, even though it's relaxing, like I would end up not doing that. Especially when like work was becoming more stressful, because it was kind of like I would want to just like come home and like not think about anything. And so like I really like to read, and that has kind of been pushed to the side a lot more lately. Not in the past month, because I'm trying to hit my goal. of 50 books in the year, but like I wasn't getting into books, and I was finding that I wasn't doing these things that I enjoyed because I was just like, I need a break. And I just kept wanting a break from things and didn't know like what that really meant and looked like. And so when I started thinking about 2025, I was like, what do I want my weeks to look like? We did a pretty good job, more so in the beginning of the year. Not so much as we kind of like hit the summer and the wedding was like upon us, but like where we were going on dates and doing fun things that like we don't normally do. Like we go out to dinner every once in a while. And that's always like fun and really nice, but just like doing other things and, getting out of like the normal routine. And that can kind of be difficult with the podcast. I found myself trying to like block all of my weekends because I didn't want to be working on the podcast, but I needed to be working on the podcast. And so I just kind of really sat down and was like, I want my calendar to be less busy in 2025. As we were getting ready for the wedding, I wasn't like wedding 24/7. There were a lot of little things here and there. But one of the things I did for everyone who was in my wedding party, I made them something out of black work embroidery. And that was like really great to have this thing that I was doing and creating. I was actually doing a lot of it while I was podcasting. I listened back to all of the episodes after they recorded, and I could be working on that while I was doing that. And so like once we got to the wedding, granted I had not finished my maid of honors piece of work. But after the wedding, I like kind of like stopped doing that because it was like the deadline passed. At this point, I have finished hers, and I will be seeing her at the end of the year and giving it to her then. She did see it half done at the rehearsal dinner, which was great. But so it's like things like that. Like I want to be able to do those things without feeling like, oh, I only can squeeze it in here. And I want to be able to read more consistently. Like I read over my lunch breaks most days. But I don't always. Like if work is like super stressful, I'm like, I don't even find myself doing that. And like these past couple weeks where like a lot of my evenings have been reading has just been like really great and enjoyable. And there are various video games that, we've played and stuff that it's like, I want to be able to do that too. And, I don't know how much we're going to travel in 2025, but still having the option even to just like do things locally. So the primary reason that I am ending my podcast is to like gain that time back into my life. It is not, related to wanting to like stop talking to people, because that's like when I made the decision, or at least I started thinking about the decision for, I don't know if it was weeks, but at least days before I even vocalized it to you, Coleman. Like it was, I didn't want to vocalize it because I felt like, oh, if I vocalize that I'm ending this podcast, like there was part of me that felt like it was a bit of a failure, but I'm also like, it's been 4 years. I have released over 200 episodes. And that's been really awesome to see that time. And like a lot has happened in 4 years. And so like I finally vocalized it to Coleman. And then even before, like after that, I still wasn't really vocalizing it. Like I was occasionally throwing it out here or there, depending on like who I was talking to about like certain things, but it was like hard to really commit to. And the reality is having the last like month of guests was quite the puzzle piece. Because one of the more frustrating sides of podcasting is people who don't show up to their recording time slot, or people who have to like cancel or reschedule. Now, I completely understand like medical emergencies, they happen. But when I was in this, like I have, 6 weeks between now and needing to record the final episodes, and I need so many guests, and trying not to have too many guests, but having enough guests and making sure all the timing would work was definitely a little bit complicated. And then even just finding time to sit down and record this episode. So So all that to say that I am looking forward to not having that structure in 2025, along with some other changes that I'm making in 2025. But I've enjoyed, talking to all of these guests, learning different stories, and being able to put all of this out here. It has been quite the creative journey to go on, and I'm really proud of, it going on for over 4 years.
Great. First, I want to say that banish any thought that you ending the podcast is a failure in any way, shape, or form. Okay? The way I like to look at things like this, I'm a composer and I'm a saxophonist, right? And as a musician, oftentimes we deal with like imposter syndrome issues and things like that, right? And one of the things that I cling to is just remembering that, like, in the world, there's only a percentage of a percentage point of people that do what I do, right? And that's the same with you when it comes to this podcast, right? You not only started a podcast during one of the hardest times, I believe, that our generation has faced, COVID and whatnot. And you managed to keep it going for 4 years, 200 guests. That, in my book, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's this weird thing of like, while there is that like little nagging of like, oh, it's ending, that's quote problematic or a failure or whatever, like I do know that it's not. And I always knew, like, I don't know, maybe like 18 months into it or something, that like whenever I want to stop this, it's going to be difficult. So I think there was also this bit of like that, knowing that ending it was going to be difficult, because I didn't want it to just stop. I didn't want it to just be like, oh, like episode stopped releasing, I wonder what happened. And so it's just kind of like getting to that final moment and like having it be here. So yeah, which is why I'm proud of all the work that I've done. It's weird, knowing that once all of the technical behind the scenes, the 10-step process or whatever it is to go from recording to publishing of this episode, like then it won't be, it won't be continuing. It is funny because on my work calendar, I have on Tuesdays the reoccurring task to make sure like I've got everything posted on social media and stuff, just because like that's the easiest place to like check it off. And when I was cleaning up my tasks on my calendar before I left for my winter break, I like had to click on that and say like delete this and all future ones, because I was like, I don't need this task anymore. So that was definitely interesting, because I've also like in the past number of months and like cyclically, I change how I organize things every once in a while. So it's like that. The work organization is pretty steady, even though I do things differently there as well at sometimes. But that was just like an interesting, like, okay, this isn't gonna be on my calendar. But also at the same time, like when things disappear, I know that like sometimes you don't like realize it, that it's gone. Like if you were to like fix something or clean something up, like I may not realize it's been done because it was the lack of it being done that was noticeable. So it's like this weird thing that like when I get to Tuesdays at work in January, like I might not even realize that that task is gone, but I will also still be aware like, oh, I'm no longer producing, recording, and doing a podcast.
Well, going off that a little bit, how do you feel about, one of the things about the podcast, since you are inviting guests on and whatnot, that your schedule has always had blocks of time that are made available for guests to sign up for. And so you might, be trying to figure out what you're going to do for a week or two. And then all of a sudden, the time slot that you were going to do something else has been taken up by a guest. Are you looking forward to getting that time back and not having to worry about those kinds of things? Or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's been an interesting, interesting thing through all of this. Um, I, I don't remember when it was, but it was pretty early on in podcasting that I started using the website Calendly, which is if you use the level I use, a free website to schedule things. And because I was not going to pay for it, I could only link one calendar to it. And I didn't want to have all of the podcast stuff on my personal calendar. So my podcast also had a calendar. And I believe I did a really good job. And only once did somebody schedule with me. And then I went to go and update some things. And I realized, I have a concert that afternoon. I cannot record with you this day. I'm shocked. I think that was the only time. I do remember that happening. But I think otherwise I was relatively good. But balancing all of that was definitely a little bit of a nightmare. And I don't remember when it was as well either, because again, these 4 years have really ebbed and flowed. At one point, I started blocking Friday evenings because I realized that when guests would sign up with me to record for a Friday at 7 p.m., I always was like, it's my weekend. I don't want to start my weekend this way, which then made things more complicated because, like I said, Monday nights were band nights and Tuesday nights I pretty much always had blocked to listen to podcast episodes, the last one I recorded, to then listen for editing. So that was leaving Wednesday and Thursdays for recording. And then technically I would, if I had the time available, it was Saturday afternoons and all day Sunday. And I would only record typically with one person a day. And I typically wasn't doing back to back. I was learning these things as I was going, that some things doing, say, 3 nights of recording in a row was just too much. And so I am looking forward to not having such a rigid schedule with that, and getting those nights back. I accepted a position with our band to be the board's president next year. And I remember when one of the current board members told me we already have our meeting in January scheduled. And she was like, it's a Wednesday. And it was one of these 2 days. And at the time it was because at that time I knew I wasn't continuing with the podcast. It was just tell me the date whenever it's closer to, because I'm not going to have anything. It doesn't matter. Whereas in the past number of years, it would have been no, I need that date now because I need to block it. Otherwise I'm or I'd go in and block both days until I found out which one was the correct day. And so it's not having to do all of that. We recently, I say we because we live in the same house, but I recently got a second whiteboard calendar, so that I can have a whiteboard calendar for the current month and the next month. And that has been such a game changer. And because it was always kind of difficult, when you get to the end of the month, you're, at least I am. I'm starting to think about the next month, and I don't have that full visible what the month looks like. And looking at January, it's a lot more empty. And even some of these past months have been a little bit empty here and there, and it's just really nice to know. I don't know if I will in January, but in theory, I could have a work week where Monday night we do band, and then Tuesday through Friday I have nothing else. And I don't know really when the last time that happened. If it did happen, I was probably stressing about the fact that I didn't have a recording. Or the reality is I just had something else going on. So I'm really looking forward to the option of that happening, or even if I do have something in an evening like this board meeting, it's probably the only thing I'm going to have that week that's not rehearsal. So I am very much looking forward to seeing more empty days on my calendar, which will allow for more opportunity.
Yeah. Another thing related to scheduling that you didn't mention is sometimes when you would get some of those things blocked off and they would, keep you from doing other things that you needed to do and whatnot. Sometimes the guests, we're human, sometimes, dealing with time zones and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes things got messed up and the recordings didn't happen. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are, your reflections on that happening, and you know, are you looking forward to not having to deal with that, I guess, going forward?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mentioned a little bit about the occasional cancellation or no show, and I'm happy to not have to deal with that going forward. Because like in a work day when you're in a business with everyone, like that rarely happens. But this is people's personal lives, personal calendars. Because sometimes it's like I would reach out to the person, they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, like just give me a few minutes." Or sometimes like they just would never respond. I had a couple people who would reschedule multiple times, and like that was really hard because it's like, well, are you going to show up the next time? And like if you were scheduled with me like far enough in advance, like I didn't really care. But there were times, and this like one of the hopes in when I switched the scheduling was for this to be less, but there was some times where like I was recording an episode within 7 days of it being released. And so if somebody didn't show up, that was, you know, very difficult. So I'd either have to like try to find somebody else or hope that the next person didn't cancel. So I'm definitely looking forward to not having to deal with scheduling. And not because like I did get better responses once I started sending the reminders. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone like saw the reminders or like double checked and yeah, so it's definitely looking forward to that.
And just going back to the whole having had 200 some episodes, and I can't remember 100%, but I don't think you ever missed a scheduled release. So there were times where I think we were turning episodes around in 24 hours. But yeah, I think that's pretty awesome. So
Yeah, I mean, you are correct. I did never miss a release. I think maybe once I did a recording on a Monday that was released on a Tuesday. There were probably less than five where it was a recording on a Sunday to release on Tuesday. And here we are today on the Saturday before this episode is getting released. But this will be one of the significantly easier ones to edit and turn around. And that was kind of more of I was like, we will both be in a better headspace if we do this on Saturday afternoon than after we both have an 8-hour work day. So I'm not too worried about that. But yeah, I think, that was kind of one of the things, like I was putting that pressure on myself. I always want to release on the day I'm supposed to release. And that is probably a little bit unrealistic when it is fully in-house. And I obviously have your support in all of the editing, but past that, it's like, it's just the two of us. When I would start my episodes with people, like before we would hit record, we would usually chat and whatnot or chat afterwards. And, I'd occasionally get various questions about doing the episodes and stuff. And I would, tell them that like, I have a full-time job. Like this is something on the side. Like I can't be putting so many hours into it. And like, in theory, I could. There are plenty of people who, whether it's podcasting or more so like social media, where they do it on the side and eventually it becomes basically a full-time job, whether or not they also have a full-time job, and then it might become a full-time job. But I was never planning to get to that point. I have the security of a, salaried job with benefits, and that's not something that like I foresee myself giving up, just in the complicated nature when it comes to like insurance and taxes and all of those things in the States. I was never looking to do something like this full time, but it has been a really good 4 years of doing it while doing everything else.
I think one of the nice things about not doing it for financial reasons is that you got to run it the way that you wanted to do it. you didn't have to make concessions or compromises in any way just to like chase money. So I think it's really cool from my perspective to see how authentic all the episodes are, and you know, you not having to cheapen yourself down to make yourself appealing to the masses or whatever.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that like I loved every single episode I released, but there was never an episode that I recorded and didn't release. I do know that some podcast hosts will do that, like if they truly tank. But I always released episodes that I recorded, which at times was like hard because, like with a job interview, which I'm sure more people are familiar with, like you put your best self forward. So because this was not a full-time thing, I didn't have the time to be like, okay, I'm going to do a full deep dive into every single person before I record with them to know like how do they typically talk? What is their full story? Like I was typically going off of a short bio and taking people at their word. Now, people who I recorded with, like my last guest, Julia, who I found via social media, I knew a lot more then because I was seeing them on social media, and that was why they ended up on my podcast. So it definitely was like would have the occasional person. I mean, there were a number of people that would reach out to be on the podcast. And I had the ability to say no. Like I didn't have to, take every person who showed up. So I'm glad that I had that flexibility. But yeah, I was able to kind of keep doing it how I wanted to do it. And definitely more recently, I didn't actually like fully look at the statistics, but more of my episodes in the last while have been right around that 45-minute mark. I think some of that had a bit to do with the authenticity of the guests and the how many questions or maybe like how tired was I when we were recording. Like I always feel like I did a really solid job of asking questions and continuing the conversation. But sometimes it's just like that's, this is good. We're good at this time. I'm not going to like force it to be 50, 55 minutes. And one of the things with podcasting when I started was like, I want the episodes to be around the same length, within, say like a 10-minute window, 5 under, 5 over. But I was like, I'm not going to force that to happen. Though I would say overall, I averaged out to where I wanted to be.
Yeah. Now that you've had nearly 200 guests on your podcast, what are some highlights or takeaways that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, so I feel like there was so much. Talking to nearly 200 people really, really is a lot. I did, like, if I had released a few more episodes, I would have hit 200 since I had just over 200 guests. But I was the guest sometimes, and I had the few highlight episodes. And obviously, Julia was here twice. So 200-ish. But I it I think some of the most interesting episodes were when people really talked about like their growth. My most popular episode far and away was an early episode in my first year with Kelly Kraut, who at the time was running, I believe, for governor of Arkansas. And so like that's the reason it was the most popular episode. She put it on her campaign website and therefore let the media take it, But I also like her being the underdog, her sharing about her friends' expectations of her and like questioning like how could you be a Democrat? Things like that. I think seeing growth in people was always really great. And I think like I've, had growth in myself when I think about various topics. When people, I wasn't ever really someone who would constantly be like, oh, I have a podcast. You should listen to it. I like it was always just kind of part of me and it existed. But when people would ask me about it and I would talk about it, like I'd talk about how I talk to all these different people. Like, yes, sometimes it is very diversity or inclusive related. Sometimes it's more about jobs. Where has your career taken you? Or sometimes it's about travel. I always love the travel ones just because, nobody can go see everything. You can't experience every single culture in the world. We have yet to renew our passports since they expired and we changed our names. We will. We'll get there and be able to do those things. But I think for me, and I think maybe there's even some of that with in ending this podcast, that in these past 4 years, along with releasing the podcast and the state of COVID and the state of the world, like mental health has become much more of a forefront in conversation. That I think like that's so important as well, along with like mental health and identity. That I think there's some of that there as well. And, me wanting to be able to have the time to relax, be able to, be who I want to be. And it's not like, I know that like with media and stuff like that, like you find that people are like completely two-faced, or they're not. But, sometimes you hear that, oh, this person, this famous person, all of a sudden, like, yeah, they're actually an awful person behind doors, or like, oh, they're actually like really great. I wasn't like switching a persona when I sat down to record, but in the days where I may not have felt great or may have been really tired, like I still had to sit down and do it. And then when it was done, it was like, okay, I can breathe again. So I like not having to kind of be on for that. Especially when like, it wasn't something that was working towards a financial goal. Like, I think it's really important to be able to be authentic, as long as like it's safe and viable, like in all aspects of life. And I know that that can be definitely challenging at work, depending on, the situation. But I think, it's being who you want to be. And so I'm grateful that I am able to do that at work. And I don't have to, be getting into dress shoes and dress pants every single day. Like I can be comfortable and, I can be real with my colleagues. So yeah, I just talking to nearly 200 people, hearing all their different stories. I'm grateful to have learned about like different paths of life. The number of people I spoke to about different disabilities or illnesses and just walks of life that like, unless you know someone, like those ones I feel like are harder to just kind of run across. I there have been various health things, whether in my immediate family or extended family and stuff, but it's like past those, like I don't have the experience or knowledge in these other things. I see some of it on social media. And so I think that was like this really good thing for me to get the chance to dive into and hear more about. Because otherwise, it just I wouldn't have had that knowledge. So I'm grateful to have gained that knowledge, and heard about different things. I think the first time I spoke to somebody who, was like related to, I believe, like the whole like Miss America and Miss USA universes, like I didn't really know much anything about that. And I talked to a couple of different people who did various competitions like that. And it was just like interesting to see, you might immediately think one thing and then like you actually talk to the person and it's something different. So I think that was also just really exciting to be able to hear that and just learn about all these different stories. So I'm grateful to have had the chance to talk to so many people.
Yeah, you mentioned growth, like how you enjoy watching the growth and the stories that they tell. And I was just wondering, knowing that at the start of the podcast you had a set of goals and whatnot that you wanted to attain via the podcast, and I was just curious if you felt like during the course of the last 4 years, you've been able to attain those goals, and found the growth within yourself, that you were looking for.
Definitely, for sure. I don't think I necessarily ever physically wrote down what goals I was really aiming to achieve. I do know that, like, when I started the podcast and I was working at my last higher ed job, this came out of a DEI initiative, in that I wanted to move myself into a more inclusive mindset while I already, was where I was. Like, I knew I could do more, and I was just struggling to find ways to do that. And therefore, I was like, what if I just talk to people? I feel like I've definitely grown there. Even just in some of the ways I think about certain things, or the verbiage that I use. Like, I try to respect lifestyles that aren't my own, and have those different conversations, and not, immediately fall into some of those implicit biases. So I do think I've definitely grown in that aspect. I also do definitely consider myself an introvert. I enjoy going to other things and being around people, but I also really enjoy being by myself, holing up in the house with the cats. So I talking to different people every week definitely was something that I wasn't sure, what that would look like and how it would feel. But I did it. I survived. I had a good time with it. So there's definitely been a lot of personal growth, and I think I've definitely succeeded in those ways.
So, do you think you'll get back into podcasting anytime in the future? What are your thoughts? What's your your forecast in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really foresee myself getting back into podcasting. I'm not saying I'm gonna write it off like forever, but and this is kind of is with something else that I'm leaving in 2024. Like, I need a break. Um, and I think doing the podcast in the way I've done it is not something I could go back to. If I didn't have a full-time job, sure, that would open up a world of possibility in doing the podcast in the way that I did it. In thinking of other ways to podcast, knowing that there are other options, like, some of those might be viable, but I'm just not looking to that right now. I don't foresee that being something in the near future. I think it's kind of got to see, there's a lot of things that have changed in the last 4 years, even just like in our personal lives, and how, looking forward to the future, that I feel like I want to experience those things. I want to know how all of that comes together, and what that looks like. I mean, even yesterday, we were talking about, like, this one band that, is smaller, and we just saw recently. They happened to be at a local college. They announced like a second half of the tour, and with like two other bands that we would love to see are both touring close to the Eastern United States in March, when at this point, I don't know if we have both fully committed to doing two musicals, but like, we're both doing two musicals, and like, I would like to breathe in those weeks that I'm not doing a musical. So I just, like, I want to be able to do those things. Like, when we looked at these dates, it's kind of like, oh, we could do X date. And I was like, well, that's on a Thursday. We'd have to take both days off of work, which, like, that's not really a problem for me. But Coleman's schedule next spring, like, looks very different. So I'm excited for what the spring will bring you. But like, that also, makes things more complicated. And in hindsight, like, if I had not made this decision to end the podcast, the spring would have been chaos, to try. And by spring, I specifically mean the month of March, to to try and do this, because it's like, how would it fit in? And I would be in those moments of feeling like I don't have a break, I don't have time to pause. And if I'm in a phase at work where like things aren't wonderful, like it's gonna be a hard month. So when I think about podcasting in the future, I don't foresee it in 2025. And I think, I'm looking forward to tucking the equipment away, and maybe there's a chance in the future, but I also think, the state of podcasting, but in and social media changes constantly. So I think, it's seeing where the world goes with all of that to say whether or not that will come back into my life in the future. But for now, the answer is no. I do not think I will get back into podcasting.
Okay. Do you, reflecting back on the podcast, is there anything that you wish you had done differently, having had 4 years under your belt?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question that I haven't really put any thought into. When preparing for this episode, I gave you a whopping 2 questions and was like, have at it, be the host, be like me, and just ask questions based on what the people share. So that is not one I prompted you with, nor one that I've thought about.
Now you know what you make all your guests feel like.
Yes, it's the power of editing as well. Sometimes, trying to come up with how to ask the question, or maybe there's some pausing before an answer. But I think looking back in terms of how would I do things differently, like definitely the podcast evolved over the years and how I would keep track of things, like even just, starting to use Calendly. I think it happened pretty quickly because it was a need. The whole time zone thing, that was something that like I needed to be able to bridge that without it being absolute chaos. And how I was tracking whether or not I had all of the things I needed over time, looked a little differently. And the reminder emails, the chaos in which I did the whole calendar thing in myself for how to be available. I think in terms of what I would do different, the biggest thing that I would say is, I think as organized as I am, needing to take a step back and look at that larger picture. I did, way back when I started the podcast, record a number of episodes. I may not have had that many recorded before I went live, but I had a number of guests like confirmed. And to know that like when I start this, it's not going to be like, okay, I got 3 weeks in and then nothing. And that really ebbed and flowed. And I think it kind of comes back to that scheduling, having a lot of other commitments. I think I really needed to look at that larger picture and just kind of figure out a way to do it better. Whether it was doing more batch recording, like people do batch recording where they record a bunch, or really just being more on top of the timing. Because like what happened in this last month was like I was not recording right around the wedding. And then right after we went on a honeymoon, so like that was gone. I was reaching out to people before then and like had this quantity of like, I need to get to X amount of people. And then like once I decided to end it, I need to get so many people and whatnot. And the amount of time I gave them on the calendar, like they all started booking up in like a later weeks. And I was like, but I need somebody to record this week to get a recording out. So that kind of scheduling, I think, is something that if I could have figured out a better way to do that and manage it. But I think also that just, it's a nature of the beast of the fact that I have a full-time job that I do outside of the home. That's not to say I never recorded during my normal work hours. There were definitely times when I was like already planning to work from home or needed to adjust that. Then it was like I would block my work calendar for a period of time and like work at another time to make that up because of somebody else's schedule. I don't know the magical answer to that, how that would have worked, which is why it never kind of got to a great, perfect place. But I think that would be the biggest thing that I would change, and potentially consider, the whole release schedule. And I think those two things go in hand. Like my fear of being like, I'm going to take December off. Part of that was the scheduling, the recording, the kind of it always being a part of life, that I just didn't have that balance, because it was like, well, if I quote, take December off, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm just not releasing? Or does that mean I'm not recording and releasing? And that was where it was really hard, because it was like, if I wanted to not release for an entire month, I should have still been doing everything else. And so therefore, like, it wouldn't have felt like a break to me. I think that whole part of it, which is a solid part of like why I'm ending it, is what I would have loved to have figured it out. Just a better structure. And I think it's hard when you're balancing a full-time job, planning a wedding, and all of the other community commitments I have. Like I recently wrote a professional bio for myself, and I had this long line of like things I do in the community. And when I was actually like quantifiably writing it out, I was like, wow, that was more than I realized, because some things are very infrequent. Like I'm part of an organization that has, I think we do like 8 meetings a year. And like in the scheme of things, that's not a lot, but it also like is a good bit, because I'm also the treasurer of that organization. So like that adds some things. But yeah, I'm sure there are other things that I probably would have loved to have done differently, but that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind, that if I were to do something again, like I would really need to kind of like create that project plan and figure out, what does this actually look like, that it maintains sustainable in a way that doesn't feel like a second job in quantifiable time.
You've already talked about it a little bit throughout the podcast, but I was wondering what you are looking forward to doing most with your reclaimed time. What's next for Sarah?
There's so much. And that's the thing where it's like, how do I balance it all without, feeling burnt out? I think first and foremost, I don't even know if it's first and foremost, I have really been enjoying reading these past couple of weeks. I am looking forward to reading more and figuring out how that fits into my life, in a way that is not me reading like a dozen books in the last month of the year. That's one thing for sure. I mentioned about the blackwork embroidery. There is a creator, I guess. She has her own company called Peppermint Purple. I think that's what the company's called. And she does this SAL, SAL, which stands for Stitch Along. And like you stitch a different thing every week and it creates this larger picture. And I've been like following along, like just like looking at the posts and stuff in this later half of 2024. And while I haven't dived in and purchased the things that I need to purchase to do it in 2025, I did tell someone at work recently that I'm planning on doing it. And now I'm vocalizing it here. So like definitely committing to that. So I'm excited to do that, because it's like a year-long project that like doesn't have the deadline of like you ideally would have gotten all of these done for your wedding. So I'm really looking forward to doing that as well. And something else that we've talked about in 2025 as like things that we've talked about a number of times and just never seem to bring them to fruition, which is twofold. One, which is like doing some things with the house that will make it more livable and just kind of like have things be more organized and things in a place. Like we are getting some new furniture, which I have to like find out when that's being delivered. But like that's going to be really nice. But then it's also like other stuff. Like, do we still need this? Is this, reasonable? And the other thing being, we want to like expand the list of meals that we make and consume. And so I'm looking forward to like tackling that in 2025. I feel like by like having some of this time in my life back, I will have that like bandwidth to connect and sit down and figure out, because like I feel like there's some times where it's like, okay, if it doesn't happen this night, like there's no way it can happen another night. So those are like the things that first come to mind in what I'm looking forward to in 25, just because there are other things that like I'm excited for and think there's opportunity for. It's just I don't know what those things look like yet. So yeah, I'm just excited for 2025.
Good. Well, we're getting close to the end here. Is there anything that you wanted to tell your listeners before, you know, the theme music plays for the last time? You know, any words of wisdom for the road?
I'm not sure. The reality is when I would ask guests that specific question, it was usually because I'm like, we have a bit more time. If they want to add something else, they can fill that time in a way because I don't have a question to ask them. So I'm not really sure that I do. I think I've said a lot of great things. In updates here, I have really enjoyed these past 4 years, and I'm excited to see what my future will hold. Right now, I'm really only on Instagram, and not that I'm really active there anyway, but I know that a handful of listeners are related to me, so they'll still know what's going on in my life. If you're not, I don't really have a plan for you to like know what's going on in my life. And the reality is like this podcast, while mine, was never intended really to be about me beyond like me facilitating it and learning along with the listeners. So I'm grateful for everyone who has listened, and I'm grateful and excited for what's to come in my life.
Now, with all of your guests at the end of the episode, you ask your guests a random question, all right? So here's my totally random question for you. All right, so we currently have 2 beautiful boys, cats that is. We have Jack, who is 4 years old. He's orange and white and just the most beautiful, clingy boy you've ever met. And then we have Socks, who is all black and a perfect angel. His eyes are full of wonder, and he doesn't cause a single stir ever. My question for you, Sarah, is if we were to get a third cat, what color would you want that cat to be?
Well, we do know that I have said that this house is not big enough for a third cat. And we've already talked about third cat names. But we got both of our cats through the same rescue, basically because we had mutual falling in love. When we got Jack, the only thing I really said was that I didn't really want a tabby, because for whatever reason I had this like biased against tabbies. I wanted like kind of like a solid colored cat. And then Jack like came out and was adorable, and it was like, well, I guess that's the cat we're getting. And with Socks, it was, I went into the cafe one evening, took a picture of this floppy, adorable little black cat, and Coleman was like, oh my God, I've got to meet this cat. I think gray cats are really pretty. There was this one cat on TikTok who, when like he was super small, was absolutely adorable, and he was brown. I no longer have my bias against tabby cats. I think my really only thing, again, I think that the cat should love us and we should love the cat. So I don't necessarily have a strong opinion about what color the cat is. But I would prefer the cat to not be orange and white or all black, just because that is what we already have. And I like having the cats look different and have their own personalities. All right, that brings this episode to a close. For the listeners who have been here since the beginning, I hope you enjoyed this corner of the internet. I'm glad I could bring so many stories forward on my podcast, and I hope that you learned a thing or two. If you've only listened to a few episodes, I encourage you to search through old episodes, as they won't be going anywhere. A big thank you to Coleman for being here with me today and all the editing he's done over the years. And to my listeners, thank you for taking the time out of your day to hear my last episode. And in the wise words of one of our favorite bands, all good things come to an end to make room for new beginnings. Bye.